evening. The Pentagon has blocked military aid to Pakistan. The US State Department has called it a state sponsor of, a safe haven rather, of terrorism. The Defense Department calls it duplicitous. A British MP has suddenly raised the Amarnath Yatra attack. The House of Lords is hosting Baloch activists. It's all music to India's ears, a vindication of Delhi's stand. On Gravitas tonight, as we look at who said what and the implications, we are also asking what triggered the sudden focus on Pakistan. What is the West eyeing? I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. The headlines first. The dragon breathes fire again. Chinese government mouthpiece, the Global Times, has called Sushma Swaraj a liar, threatens war if India does not back off at Doklam. 3 Palestinians die as protests intensify in Jerusalem. Thousands gather near the Al-Aqsa Mosque amid tightened security. Men under 50 have been barred by the police from entering the mosque. Pakistan Supreme Court winds up hearing the Panama Gate scam case, reserves the verdict, prolonging the suspense on the political future of Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. United Nations says death by AIDS has been halved in the last decade. The latest report says more than 50% patients have access to HIV treatment. Saudi Arabia's King Salman shakes up his top security team, orders the creation of a new authority to consolidate the position of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Also on Gravitas, the political storm in the Maldives, how President Yamin's future also determines the future of Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. Darknet marketplaces, Alphabay and Hansa Market shut down. What does it really mean? How does this affect you? We'll talk about that ahead on the show. And also the Indian women's cricket team that is in the World Cup finals for the first time in 12 years. We're setting up Sunday's Clash of the Lords right here on Gravitas for you. But first, the big news of this hour. United States has decided to not pay Pakistan $350 million in military reimbursements. The decision was taken after a US assessment concluded that Pakistan has not taken sufficient action against the Haqqani network. This is the second time the Pentagon has decided to not make military reimbursements to Pakistan. Last year, the same body withheld $300 million in reimbursements. This development comes at a time when the Trump administration is considering hardening its approach towards Islamabad. And joining me with more on this is Glenn Carl from Massachusetts in the US, an American writer and former CI official. Also, my colleague Ramesh Ramachandran, who's tracking developments from the Ministry of External Affairs in India very, very closely. Good evening to both of you. Glenn, from the Department of Defense report to the State Department report to the Pentagon's decision to block this military aid, is there a gradual hardening of position as far as America is concerned?
Well, I think the answer is yes. The fascinating thing from an American perspective sitting here is that you appear in India to be able to see a coherent series of steps coming from Washington that largely escape us here, almost completely awash in the various scandals that are consuming the Trump administration. But the presentation you made is quite coherent. And I think what this indicates is, to the extent the U.S. has a foreign policy, it's being driven by the Defense Department and Secretary Mattis, who is the most competent, I think, effective member of the cabinet, certainly with regard to foreign policy. And these steps are in line with the Defense Department's, broadly speaking, Defense Department's views. So it does appear to be a hardening of positions, yeah.
Ramesh, how does the government of India see this?
Palki, clearly the sources are telling WION that this is another indication of the vindication of India's position on the issue of cross-border terrorism emanating from India's immediate neighborhood, which affects both Afghanistan and India. Palki, the fact of the matter is this is the fourth decisive action in as many weeks from the US insofar as Pakistan is concerned. And as I've been saying here on WION for the last several days now, we saw the US designate Syed Salahuddin as a global terrorist when Prime Minister Modi was in Washington for talks with President Trump. That was their first decisive action. The second, the American lawmakers are wanting to push suitable legislation revisiting or rethinking American aid to Pakistan. Third, the US State Department report criticizing Pakistan for offering safe havens for terrorists, calling out Pakistan for not doing enough against those terror groups which are particularly targeting both Afghanistan and India. And now this Pentagon decision to not to release the military reimbursement for the second in a row to Pakistan. So clearly, to my mind, the tide is turning for Pakistan, and it remains to be seen how it translates on the ground going forward as far as India is concerned, because many say the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and many people say we'll not rush to judgment and wait for things to pan out and determine how it impacts India on the ground going forward.
Glenn, I'm looking at this issue from all sides, and I have the luxury of changing my position and turning the question on its head and saying, well, this was something that the Pentagon decided last year as well. So what has changed given Donald Trump's strong pronouncements against Pakistan?
Well, I'm not sure if it's a change so much as a continuation of, excuse me, of the strategic rapprochement or alliance growing between the United States and India, and American frustration with what's happening in Afghanistan, and all roads lead to Pakistan and in that issue. So. Certainly Obama had been frustrated. Every president's been frustrated with Pakistan. I think these are steps in line. I hesitate, as I've said, to give them too much substantive meaning yet. I hope perhaps that I'm too cautious, but so far taking positions has been relatively easy coming from Washington, but following through has not. The description of steps taken that you have laid out is about the most coherent series of foreign policy steps the United States has taken since Trump has come into office, which I would attribute to Secretary Mattis.
Ramesh, in the 2018 budget, which is yet to be finalized on Capitol Hill, $800 million have been sought in funds for Pakistan. No decision, as I said, has been made. But since 2002, according to a report, Pakistan remains the largest recipient of what is known as coalition support funds reimbursements to assist a government to tackle extremists. Now, of course, more and more American lawmakers are coming out and saying that Pakistan isn't doing enough, whether it be about the Haqqani network or the Taliban. Having said that, does India see a stronger line after the meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi only recently?
Absolutely, Palki. But the fact remains that to put things into perspective and context here, what America is doing is in keeping with America's interests in Afghanistan specifically and the region at large. So India should not dismiss the fact that they are not doing it for India or on behalf of India. They're doing it from their national security interest or perspective. Now, that said, this is, as I've been saying here, is a series of decisions taken by the US in recent times against targeting Pakistan in particular. So, to that extent, yes, this is a welcome development, and Indian sources are telling WION that it is a vindication of India's position on the issue of cross-border terrorism emanating from India's immediate neighborhood.
Glenn, we understand that the White House is soon going to take up debating the long-delayed strategy in Afghanistan, and we understand that this new strategy will not focus solely on Afghanistan. Are these moves, these reports, these statements in preparation for what could come?
Well, it appears to be a coherent approach to turning the screws on Pakistan so as to, as you said, to affect in some way the situation, one hopes in a positive way from the U.S. perspective, the situation in Afghanistan. I agree completely. The issue for the United States is how to resolve the fighting in Afghanistan so that the United States doesn't have to sit there for another 50 years, which right now would appear to be likely to be how it would play out. So I think that is what appears to be happening. Now, the United States has been furious about Haqqani and about Pakistan's complicity for decades. We have withheld funds before, but Pakistan has always been and still is important for the provisioning of American effort in Afghanistan and for whatever steps are taken along the border. That will remain to be true. So I think there are limits. There have always been limits, at least, to how much pressure the U.S. Has been willing to put on Pakistan. But at least the degree has started to move to some extent, it appears.
Right. Mandy Clark, our London bureau chief, is also joining us live this evening. Mandy, pressure on Pakistan growing not just from America but in the UK as well. Some interesting developments over the past week. An MP suddenly raises the Amarnath Yatra attack. You just followed a conference that hosted Baloch activists inside the House of Lords. Are these moves coordinated? Is there a sustained effort to put Pakistan under the scanner to hold it accountable?
I don't necessarily think it is coordinated because it's come the MP that's brought it forward. He's a Conservative MP. He does represent Harrow, East Harrow, which has a large Indian diaspora. His name's Bob Blackman, and he's an Englishman, but clearly he's come to understand what happened, and he has tabled what's called an early day motion. So it's a way to avoid having a formal debate in the House of Commons, but still raising it. He's got 8 MPs to sign it. So you're seeing what's happening in the subcontinent between India and Pakistan, really not just a conversation now in the Indian diaspora, it's reaching the wider public, the British public. And as you mentioned, the London conference about Balochistan, that was hosted by Baroness Jenny Jones. It was in the House of Lords. It was after hours, but certainly it's these high-profile events where they're using the Parliament to highlight the issues. And Bob Blackman, the MP, was certainly damning in his assessment of Pakistan letting terrorists operate within their borders, and he really wants to investigate if there is any links to the UK and to cut those links. So you are seeing mounting pressure, but not necessarily coordinated. It's just coming to, you know, the knowledge of people who don't necessarily follow the ins and outs of what's happening between India and Pakistan.
Glencar, let me put the same question to you. What is it that has suddenly triggered the West's interest or focus on Pakistan? India has been saying this for many, many, many years, and the West has said Pakistan remains a crucial ally in the war against terrorism. How is it that the tide has suddenly, or it seems to have changed?
Well, the administration has changed, and the Republicans have long taken a more hostile and activist approach towards state-sponsored terrorism. And the way they conceptualize how to go after terrorism in general is to use more direct state-to-state or U.S. to terrorist organization force, direct force. Obama took an approach that downplayed or focused less on state-sponsored terrorism. I think that, combined with the fact that you have Generals McMaster and Mattis driving the coherent aspects of American policy, and our frustrations coming to a head in Afghanistan as the situation has grown worse, and this would add up to saying, well, enough with Pakistan. I will remind everybody that Vice President Biden, 8 years ago or so, in an important debate in the White House on how do we go after Al-Qaeda and the problem in Pakistan, said, how much aid are we giving to Pakistan? The issue was something, I don't know, $1 billion or $2 billion a week. How much are we devoting to counterterrorism and so on in Pakistan across the border? It was $100 million or $200 million. And he said, where is Al-Qaeda? The answer was, well, it appears the terrorists are in Waziristan and the frontier provinces. And he said, well, perhaps we are misdirecting our attention then. So this is not a new realization, but with the state focus of Republican approach to counterterrorism, this is, I think, why this is happening.
Ramesh, of course, while we look at all of this and we do not know what has woken up the West to the truth about Pakistan, it's a no-brainer to say that the government of India is going to take credit for changing the international perception, for even persuading some powers in the West to finally appear to take some action against Pakistan.
Absolutely, Palki. It seems the law of diminishing returns is applying in the case of terrorism, especially that which is fomented, aided and abetted by Pakistan. But that's it, Palki. There are two hallmarks. To my mind, there are two hallmarks of Pakistan's policy, security and foreign policy. One, it is to use terrorism as an instrument of state policy. And two, Pakistan is, runs with the hare and hunts with the hound. They are working with the US, have worked with the US and also against the US at once. So clearly, the time has come, as India is being pointed out in every international forum, be the G20 or the East Asia Summit, led by Prime Minister Modi, none less than him, that it's time the coalition, the international coalition, lean on Pakistan to make it desist from using terrorism as a state policy, especially that directed against India. And at the same time, it's not a question of how many millions of dollars is the America withholding from Pakistan. It may be a few millions of dollars this way or that way. The fact remains that essentially what India is contesting or contending is that every dollar given to America invariably is used eventually to foment and foist terrorist attacks directed against India. And from that perspective, America needs to reconsider giving Pakistan more military aid than before. And as a former Indian official has been pointing it out repeatedly over the years, American military aid to Pakistan is like giving alcohol to an alcoholic, and it must stop.
Mandy Clark, let me come back to the issue of Balochistan. That's something that was talked about in the Indian establishment, at least in muted tones, before the Prime Minister came out and said it in his Independence Day speech and sort of sought to draw the international attention to the atrocities being committed inside Pakistan. This conference that you followed in London, how much pressure does it put on Pakistan? Who are the people who attended, and what locus standi do they have?
Well, the people who attended were experts in the field, and they range from all over. There was a New York Times journalist, there were academics, there was one who was from the UN, another person traveled from Germany, and they had a very strong understanding of the region, the issue, the problems. There's Peter Thatchell, who's a human rights activist, who came up with possible solutions on how the international community can put pressure on Pakistan to end human rights abuses in Balochistan. Interestingly, I mentioned it was hosted by Baroness Jenny Jones, and when she was approached by Peter Thatchell, who along with the World Baloch Organization and another UN branch, asked her to host it, she admitted she had never even heard of Balochistan. So she was quick to, she found out a lot about it. She was very distressed to hear about a lot of those human rights abuses and felt it important to bring it to a higher platform, bring it to the House of Lords so it would garner media attention. And that was the whole point of this conference, was to really raise the level up. So more of the international community, the press, and international human rights organizations were made aware of the situation in Balochistan. Jenny Jones compared it to Syria, the amount of abuses that are going on, but it's just almost forgotten about in the West.
Right. Mandy, Glenn, Ramesh, thank you very much for joining us. The world, as we said, is waking up to Pakistan's true colors, and they're far from pretty. India has for long been frustrated by the West's self-serving distinctions between terror groups targeting Western countries and those attacking India. For decades, Pakistan, we know at least, has nurtured, sponsored, armed and trained terrorists of groups like the Lashkar-e-Toiba, the Jaish-e-Mohammed and the Hizbul Mujahideen, among others. And its army has obliged by helping them infiltrate the borders to India and wreak terror, mostly upon innocent civilians. But even after many of its own citizens were killed in the bloodshed in Mumbai in 2008 by the Lashkar-e-Toiba, amply aided by Pakistan's inter-services intelligence, India's pleas to take action against Pakistan for providing a safe haven fell upon deaf ears. There was some lip service for sure, token prescriptions, but to the West, Pakistan remained a quote-unquote crucial partner in its own anti-terror wars in the region. Now the verdict is out. Both the US and the UK, chief allies in the global anti-terror war, have pointed to Pakistan as the motherlode of terrorism directed against India and even upon its own people in Balochistan. And India has every reason to smile. So who said what? And why are some countries, including India's own neighbors, still bent on keeping their blinkers on? Senior foreign editor Padma Rao answers those questions.
Former Secretary of State John Kerry in 2013 called Pakistan a hard-working democracy, one important for regional stability. The US State Department report in 2016 calls Pakistan a safe haven for terror groups like the Lashkar-e-Taiba and the Jamaat-ud-Dawa, groups that are openly engaging in fundraising. It also points out that Lashkar-e-Taiba's chief Hafiz Saeed still addresses large rallies in Pakistan. The United States provided aid of more than $1.6 billion to Pakistan even after Osama bin Laden was found in a Pakistan cantonment in 2013. A congressional panel says it will impose tougher aid conditions if no action is taken against terror groups, and it indeed does block aid for no action against the Haqqani network. In 2013, the United Kingdom's former Prime Minister David Cameron said enemies of Pakistan are enemies of Britain. In 2017, Tory MP Bob Blackman says that the conflict in Jammu and Kashmir is sponsored by Pakistan to spread terror in India. A former foreign minister of Israel in 2005 said he hoped for a full diplomatic relationship with Pakistan. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu shied away from naming Pakistan, merely saying that any country with terror groups must take action. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina said in 2016 that the two countries have to solve problems, but relations between Bangladesh and Pakistan will remain. The Sri Lankan president said in 2015 that there was an abiding friendship with Pakistan. A Nepal envoy pointed out to the complementarities between Nepal and Pakistan in 2017. And Maldives President Yameen said in 2016 that there were close neighbourly relations with Pakistan. Padma Rao, WION.
And still ahead on the show, why political churn in Maldives affects India and China. We'll be joined by former President Nasheed himself. Do stay with us.